Hello, everyone. Welcome to Find Your Empath with Megan and Christine. And today we are going to be talking about the two different types of empaths and how that sort of connects with Myers-Briggs personality type and some advice of what to do about it. So how's it going today, Christine?
Pretty good.
You might recognize Christine from our astrology video that we uploaded about a month ago, I think. So,
yeah, I think so. Oh, it's been a while, yeah.
Yeah.
Anniversary.
This is just, and you also might recognize her from last week's episode of Synchronic Saturdays. So, yeah. And for those of you who don't know, I am a Leo sun with a Cancer rising and a Aries moon. Christine is do you want to say it? I was going to, but I realized I keep talking for you. Classic
Okay.
ENFJ.
Yeah, so I'm a Cancer sun, a Capricorn moon, and a Leo rising.
And ENFP. So, and I'm an ENFJ. So we're kind of coming at it from similar but different angles, especially with our Leo and Cancer energy.
Yeah.
So a lot of you guys watching this have probably heard of what it means to be an empath. But just in case you haven't, Christine, how would you define empath?
I would define empath as a person who has higher than average capabilities of feeling other people's emotions, as well as their own to some degree. And being able to relate to other people in a very subjective way.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to see if there's a definition I could find online, because I guess the purpose of this video, guys, and Christine and I talk a lot about just like NF shit, psychic shit, and like how to navigate the emotional waters that is life as a human being. Which is very vague, but I found that in a lot of the spiritual communities, people just talk about being an empath, but not necessarily the different ways that can manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this article, the top 10 traits of being an empath, so we can sort of go through that if you're interested.
Cool.
But wait, what?
Get some TE evidence.
Yeah. Okay, so here are the top 10 traits of being an empath, which is from Judith Orloff, who wrote the Empath Survival Guide. And so this is a pretty credible source as far as empaths go. This woman has written about empaths before. 1, empaths are highly sensitive. 2, empaths absorb other people's emotions. 3, many empaths are introverted. Not sure if I would agree with that one.
To be honest, I do think ENF types who are empathic are more introverted than other ENF types.
That's a good point. That's a good point. 4, empaths are highly intuitive. 5, empaths need alone time. 6, empaths can be overwhelmed in intimate relationships. 7, empaths are targets for energy vampires. 8, empaths are replenished in nature. 9, empaths have highly tuned senses. And 10, empaths have huge hearts and sometimes give too much.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And something I've talked about before on my channel is that I think that a lot of the self-help and personal development sort of advice that you see out there is not very individually tailored to the person. And Christine, would you consider yourself an empath?
I would most certainly consider myself an empath.
Yeah, same. And I would say that different advice would, or like some sort of empath advice might be very helpful for me, but detrimental for you, and vice versa. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah. So, any thoughts that you'd like to share sort of right off the bat, or?
Yeah, I would say I'd like it if we could both share maybe one or two types of advice that worked for us personally to show
That'd be cool.
NFP and NFJ empaths.
Yes, because what I didn't explicitly say yet, for those of you who are watching this who are not familiar with Myers-Briggs, chances are, if you resonate with being an empath, you are an NF, but that's not always the case. But most of the traits you see when you read about empaths are pretty much describing NFs. And what we're going to talk about sort of today is how NFP types use one set of cognitive functions and NFJ types use a complete other. And so there are almost two different completely sort of types of being an empath. And then, of course, you can look and make the more extroverted and the more introverted. But would you like to sort of start with your experience and advice that has helped you?
Yeah. So, I guess one kind of theory that Megan had, and I'm going to kind of provide an example of how I've experienced that in my own life, was that I've struggled being an empath. Like, I thought being an empath was the worst part of me. Like, I wish I could just get rid of it. And, you know, I thought there was like so many things wrong with me and like everybody else was right. But basically what I realized was the reality that I was living in was not mirroring to me truth about my own feelings, my own emotions, and what I want and what I need in my life in some way or another. So like this can vary for NFPs who have experienced like extreme abuse where they're just not being seen or heard at all, or you know, they just feel silenced in some way by society, by the people they are surrounded with. So just keep that in mind. You know, just because something in your life doesn't seem terrible or like the worst case scenario doesn't mean that it's not serious and that it's not affecting you. So I guess an example of that in my life would be I was kind of living in a place where people didn't really like believe in themselves. So I had a lot of friends who were kind of like down on themselves, or they would beat themselves up like when they made a mistake. And you know, now I'm realizing it's totally not their faults. Like the system is kind of just messed up to where people feel like failures all the time. And so it's common that, you know, being in an environment where people don't feel great about themselves, you'll start to feel that way too. And you'll wonder why you feel like shit, because everybody else seems to be putting up with the same crap that you are, but you have a different place to go. You know, you don't want to feel like shit as an NFP, I think. And so I feel like that's kind of what inspired me to seek a different reality, one that was mirroring, you know, to me, things that I cared about, things that were emotionally satisfying to me and to the people that I cared about, the people whose stories and ideas resonated with me. That's kind of where things started to shift. And so I feel like that's very important for all NFPs. You know, post some comments for your experiences, because I mean, that's just one of many. I think everybody kind of cycles through this in their lives. And you know, you shouldn't be ashamed to just say that like something wasn't cool because it didn't feel cool to you. And so yeah, we need to practice like validating that side of ourselves more and changing our realities accordingly.
Yeah, I love that. And so for me, my empath experience has been, so I guess before I get into mine, what is going to be easier for me is if I explain that the main difference I see between the two types of empaths is that one type of empath, the NFP empath, is very sensitive to the vibes and the vibrational reality around them. And they're going to be very sensitive to what is possible and what's not possible, and sort of the thought patterns and the beliefs of everyone around them. And if they're not careful, then they can get very delusional with what is. And then there's the NFJ empaths that are very sensitive to the feelings of others around them, and they can be very overwhelmed with feeling overly responsible for doing something about it, that if they're not careful, then they completely have no self-love at all and can't go on their path the way their path is intended to be. So there's a slight difference, and that's because NFPs use extroverted intuition and introverted feeling, and NFJs use extroverted feeling and introverted intuition. And our introverted function is the aspect of us that is going to feel more sturdy, and our extroverted function is going to be the one that we're going to be picking up on things from others and are going to be very sensitive. And it's important to learn how to have boundaries to protect that sensitive aspect. So for me, I just struggled with feeling sad and crying and not knowing why, and feeling overwhelmed or in a negative mood and not knowing why, a lot, and feeling like very responsible, even if people were treating me not very great, that I had to still be the one and be kind and loving back to everyone, because I almost felt like I need to demonstrate what love is all the time to help change the world. And it doesn't matter how people treat me, because I have to still decide to be loving back. So it's hard for me to even think of a specific time, but I will just say that I have been working on having better boundaries and having healthier relationships. But in high school and college, a lot of my pattern was that it didn't matter how deserving someone was of my love, I was going to just give it out anyway. So that's that.
Yeah, that's very real.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think to some degree too, everybody feels the pressure of their shadow functions.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would say if you're an NF, your top two shadow functions. So when Megan talks about feeling the need to be this perfect person despite all the chaos that's going around you, I relate to that too. And I feel like it's kind of an unhealthy behavior. But when you're breaking down so much, you don't realize it, because you can justify that if it's making a positive effect to people, you know, it's fine. But the truth is, if your intention is not pure, if you're not fulfilling like your own happiness, then you're going to have a net negative effect on them when you're trying to help them, because you'll grow to be resentful. You know, you won't give them wholehearted help that they actually need. You're not aware of your own experiences so that you can relate to the people who are suffering. And so to be in touch with both sides of it is so important. And I think, like, you know, people who are debating over FI or FE, you know, that should just not be a thing, because I think to have a good world, to have a good society and like a fulfilling life, we really do need both, and we need to pay attention and like monitor how we're using both in our lives every day. So
yes, absolutely. And something else though I've noticed with this is, so not all NFs are going to necessarily be or relate to being an empath. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think also it is on a sliding scale. Like some are more than others. Some have more work priorities, but they might still be like empathic, and these things are like hiding beneath the surface. So yeah, I think people are aware of it to different degrees, and people actually resonate with the idea of being an empath to different degrees. But
yeah, I agree with that. And I guess I also want to say that to be an empath, it doesn't mean you're a more empathetic person than anyone else. Because if anything, being an empath could, it's almost like you're more sensitive to the intuitive, emotional environment, which that could either be, you can either use that to your benefit, or you can have that limit you and inhibit you from actually having healthy empathy. So don't think that you have to be an empath necessarily to be like a super empathetic person. But I know Christine and I both relate on sort of overdoing the empathy in certain times in our life. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so I think connecting to that point you made where you don't have to be an empath to be empathic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important, because when empaths are going out in the world and just living their lives and thinking that everybody is as empathic as they are, we find out that, like, we're sorely disappointed, and people don't always have the purest intentions. Sometimes they want to, but like I said, other things get in the way. Like, if you were in their shoes, as an empath, you understand like why things can go wrong, and so you feel even more for them, and like you start to give more to them, but they're not understanding on the same level as you are. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have to really make sure that people are aware of these things, so that they're like, we're not getting trampled on, and other people don't feel like perpetrators because they weren't aware. Like, it's not always extreme, but it is there. And yeah, it's just important for everybody to be aware of, because like some people don't know when they're overstepping boundaries. Some people like live their whole lives just being mean or like being rude, and nobody tells them, because that's just, it works in some way. So
What I would sort of correlate this to, and I wonder if there's any science about this, and maybe there is, but for example, autism is a spectrum of people that are less emotionally in tune, and they are very, like, they tend to be more left brain, just like they get logic faster. Mm-hmm. I would say empath would be almost the exact opposite, where just as it would be silly to say that you have to have autism to be like super smart, like I think empath, it's an extreme. It's like the emotions are literally on the extreme level.
Yeah.
So we have to deal with that, and it comes with its own problems, right?
Yeah.
It seems weird to sort of compare it to something that is, a scientific reality, but I'm pretty sure, like,
No, I'm totally convinced that that's what it is.
Yeah.
Like, discover it in 10 years and be like, oh, like depression is linked to shame. Like, no shit.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
God, like, wow.
Yeah, and I think that, NFP versus being an NFJ are two different types of cognition. So there are cognitive patterns that then are correlated with this sort of empathy being on the extreme level.
Yes.
And so both of these actually have different superpowers that we can be aware of and use. And as an NFJ, my superpower is that I know my own path. I know exactly what I need to do to get there. But the thing that distracts me is other people not liking me, other people's projecting emotions onto me. That whole realm of what other people feel and think, that is where it gets really messy. But it's the opposite for NFPs, where NFPs know what they feel, and they aren't as distracted by other people's emotions, but they are more distracted by which path to take.
Very true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say too, like, I think this is a theory of mine. I don't know if Megan agrees with this. My theory is that your fear that's on display to everybody, so your, you know, top 4 functions, like NFPs show to everybody, okay, this shit is not working for that person, like they need to get their shit together. I feel like that's what a lot of people think about NFPs.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, for an NFJ, they'll think like, oh my god, that person like thinks they're kind of like Jesus, like they keep sacrificing themselves and they don't need to, like,
yeah.
I feel like that's a problem with both of those.
Wait, can you explain the NFP one again? Because I totally get how NFJ people are like, who are you? Like freaking Mother Teresa? Like, calm down.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like living up to an ideal, I feel like with NFPs, we want to be our most authentic selves because we know that will cause the least amount of harm to the world. I think that's the core of what FI is. Maybe feminine FI, I don't know, like that gets a little more murky, but so by being your authentic self, you will generate the most happiness, the most, like, the best life around you, and it'll in turn like make others happy. That's kind of what you want to do, and you want to be like of practical help to other people. And so we can't do that when we're being suppressed in some way. And like I think we start to have meltdowns when we are suppressed too much. And so like it kind of looks like NPs just don't know what they want ever, and they're just like always giving up, always lazy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that I'm lazy in my life, and I'm like, I can't tell you like how hard I'm trying. It's just like it doesn't show to anybody. I think that's probably a really painful thing for INFPs, especially because they live their whole lives in that FI state. And they're always trying to be the best, but people don't really see it. So
do you think that it's sort of like you only want to take action that is completely authentic and pure-hearted, and if you can't do that, you won't do anything at all, and then people think that that's lazy?
Yeah, it's like, I don't think I realize it sometimes, but I'll be doing things, like I'll seek out opportunities that seem exciting to me, that seem like they would fulfill me. And then through doing it, I start to slack off, but I don't realize that I'm slacking off because it's not authentic to me. And so I start wanting to give up. I started saying like, I want to quit. I don't want to do this anymore. And people are like, why? Like, you committed to this, or like you said you would do this thing and you're not doing it. I think that may be more of an ENFP thing. I think INFPs are better about that. Like, they only seek out possibilities when it's completely authentic. So I think what you're saying is true for INFPs. For ENFPs, I feel like we don't know what we want yet because it's out in the world somewhere, because we're meant to function out in the world. But, you know, those experiences of finding what those things can be is painful to us, or it just doesn't work, or we just give up on it. It's kind of like chopping through the possibilities and keeping what is best for you.
Yeah, and so something that NFJs can really struggle with is we really want to trust our gut, and we really have this strong vision of who we want to be and where we want to go. And if the world doesn't match up to that, then we can really beat ourselves up and be like, why aren't you there yet? Like, and we can be very, very hard on ourselves, and we can feel like the weight of the world on our shoulders. And I think that we can compare that same intensity that NFJs have about sort of this vision that we're going after. NFPs can feel like that when you aren't getting what you want, or if your emotions aren't pure or validated.
Exactly, yeah. And it's hard also for FI users, I feel, because we need to have our emotions mirrored in some way. I think that's why a lot of them, like a lot of people my age, got into really angsty emo music around 2000.
Yeah.
And I feel like this was around the time where Pluto went into Capricorn, so there was a lot of people struggling with like issues in America, like the economy, and like even if you weren't directly a part of it, you just still kind of feel it. And so like nobody really acknowledges their emotions in our society. Like, they try to just run from them. And so when we first hear like what resonates with us, it sounds like really juvenile, but you know, it's good to experience like a song that just like hits you. Or when even like Megan talking about these things that like I don't directly experience with FE, it just is soothing to hear that other people go through like the same thing as me. And so when you don't have the right correct mirror for your emotions, like it's just gonna fall apart, and like you're gonna fall apart and not realize it. So yeah,
it's
I think
almost like all of us as empaths, we have the same sort of a similar soul, or like a similar feeling, but as different personality types, we have different tools for working through it, and so it can sort of manifest as different problems.
yeah, that's true, definitely.
Sorry, what were you saying? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you didn't cut me off. I was just thinking like, yeah, and the problem with FI is like when we don't see it out in the world like in a TE way, if we get too caught up with that, we will never really know how to get out our emotions because we've never seen it expressed, or like this hasn't happened to anybody because nobody is quite like me. I think everybody feels that to some degree, but NFPs are just like, this is our spotlight all the time. It's just like recognizing how nobody seems to notice or care that I'm suffering, you know? And so I think a part of that is the shadow function of like having the same soul as an NFJ. I feel like we're the same coin, you know, you're just the different side of the coin. And like knowing, I think we always have like an NI vision too that supports our FI, like they always work together. And so when
it's just harder to access it, right?
Yes, we can't access it because our reality is not showing us that it's even possible.
Interesting.
So I think when we see that it's possible, when our FI is validated, like in a TE way or in an FE way, then we can get the vision for our NI. So it's like, I think, yeah, that's what FE is so, that's why FE is so important for NFPs too. It's because you can find people who are going through the same thing as you. And so I think Teal Swan made a video on this yesterday or something, but you know, like when people join Alcoholics Anonymous, they actually get better because they feel connection, like they know that other people are going through the same thing as them. And so I think, yeah, that's why your shadow functions, like for NFPs, it's important to also be aware of the FE and the NI of the situation because it's likely what's clogging us, but we're not able to see it. Like it's in our shadow.
You were talking about how it could be helpful for NFP types to sort of connect with other people, and to realize that they're not alone. And I think that a lot of NFJs understand the importance of that. And so we find that it's like our duty to remind people that they're not alone. And that's why we are always trying to relate with people, whether or not it's 100% FI relating. We want to find a way to relate. So
yeah, but then your FE feels bad when you don't have the right FI about it because you're realizing that people aren't relating to your FI, they're just relating to the FE message that you wanted to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so I think so Carl Jung talks about, you know, integrating your shadow. And in socionics, NFPs have, you know, still like decently good FE and NI, even though it's part of your shadow. And like same with me having decent FI and NE. But I believe that those two functions, like your fifth and sixth function, are like very important tools for getting what you want. And so I agree with like what you're saying there, because NFJs are sensitive to the feelings of others, and we need to learn how to have boundaries and not give too much. And because if we don't remember to love ourselves, we aren't ever going to be able to complete our mission or our goal that we are wanting to do, which could relate to sort of using FI?
Yeah. And so I think like that's why a lot of NFJs join spiritual communities. Like a lot of them are really Christian, or they're part of the New Age movement, or they join like some artistic field where people are really like expressing their FI. And I think FI is connected to spirituality in some way. If you choose to care about that thing. So yeah, I think once they connect to their own FI, whatever media they choose to like portray it in, then they can feel really connected to people and they will really feel empath. So yeah, I think that's like a good thing to consider if you're an NFJ.
Yeah. So would you like to give some advice to empaths that are your type of empath, and things you wish that you would have known like earlier or now even?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think, yeah, the main thing is that NFPs need to realize that they have to shift their mental reality, whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be something like happening in the physical reality, but if like if you have a memory of something that messed you up, you kind of need to chase it and try to prove to yourself that it's not true. So for example, like if you feel stuck in your hometown, you're like, I want to get the fuck out, nothing here is inspiring me, I don't like anyone here, then get out. Like that's why they say it's really good for NFPs to travel, because you can see people living in a whole different place, you're not attached to any of your wounds anymore, so you can see who you truly are, what you truly value when everything else falls away. So yeah, I would recommend that. Or if you're just hanging out with people you don't like, I mean, stop hanging out with them. Like you can probably find a whole new group of people, because NFPs are very adaptable. They're good at empathizing with others, and I'm sure whoever you meet while you're trying to like raise your vibration, or just try to feel better, then they will be the right person for you at that time. And yeah, I would say that's my main advice for NFPs.
Yeah, so what I think was really important about that advice that you mentioned is that the NFP empath needs to really control their surroundings and realize how impressionable you might be to the people around you, and recognize that if it's not like, if you're like, I feel like there's a lot of NFPs I've noticed that like are living in a town where they don't really feel like they fit in with the people there, or maybe you feel stuck and limited in opportunities, and a lot of times you just want to move. And I think it's good to do that, or like to put yourself in a different environment with different beliefs and different types of people around you could really influence you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think like,
or go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, say what you were saying first.
Yeah, I think that's another thing I didn't really touch on, but Megan mentioned was yeah, you have to realize that you do have a gift in some way, I think, with FI users. And like they might be a little shy to admit that, but I think that of anyone who wants to share like the gifts they have with the world, it's the people who work the hardest to purify their intentions. And so like when you're sharing art or music, or a book you wrote, some kind of show, like something beautiful, I think that's what NFPs do. And NFGs do this too, kind of in a different way, but I'm sure Megan will get to that. So yeah, I think like INFPs have so many great things to offer, and they might feel self-conscious because they've never been raised in an environment where they believe those things are good. And so oftentimes, yeah, it's usually just someone who has a very pure heart, very pure soul, like kind of like a young soul, but an old one, someone who's experienced so much. And they just know that like the right things to do to be happy. And so oftentimes you have to experience pain. You have to experience what you don't want in order to find out what you do want. And so I think that's a very common life story of NFPs. That's why a lot of books are written the way they are. It's kind of around that central theme. And it goes hand in hand with the NFJ mission. of, you know, helping others and being of service to others. So yeah, that's, I think, the core of it.
Mm-hmm. So, and something else I've noticed about NFPs, like I guess advice that I would give to an NFP empath is really to learn that it's okay to say no. And I think that all sorts of empaths will relate to that. But I feel like NFPs want to entertain every possibility, and it can feel like you're trapping yourself by excluding different possibilities. I've noticed.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There's a portion of us, I think, that just wants to have fun too, and like just wants to live life, because we know like that's just the point of life, is just to live. And so when you're trying new things, like when you're experimenting, like if you kind of grew up in a good environment, but you know you're feeling bored or uninspired, I would say just try something new. Like, you know, pick up a new instrument you never thought you'd like, do something that nobody does or like everybody does, but you know, try it in a different way. And so I think that's just the fun of being an NFP, and that's like where the inspiration comes from. It's just like living and, I don't know, having fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So NFJs can be very impatient, and we have this purity of our path that we want to go down, and we have this very loud inner wisdom knocking on the door. We can be very painfully self-aware, and we can sometimes feel like we see deeper than most people around us, and it can feel very isolating. And we can feel like it's our job to do all of the emotional labor to make the world go round, and that there's nobody that is giving that intensely to us, and that we're the ones that is making sure that there is this sort of warmth and this sort of depth of understanding, and making sure everyone's on the same page, and making sure that everyone feels understood and related to, and like all of that labor, emotional labor that NFJs feel the need to do. And then we realize that not everybody feels that need, and so we might not get it back. And if everybody was like us, then NFJs would just do that, and then other people would do it for us, and it would be fine, because then everything would get figured out. But the reality is not everybody's like that. And if you are an NFJ empath, you're going to have to look out for yourself, because not everybody is going to look out for you. Not even the NFP empath.
Yeah, no,
you know?
she's so right. Yeah, she's so right. You kind of have to be like a fighter, I think. I think that's, I see that in every NFJ. Like, they just seem like a fucking badass, like beneath everything. Like, they've survived the flames, they've been on the motorcycle, they've fucked shit up, you know, for the greater good. And I feel like you guys gotta do that. Like, you gotta be your own badass. Because yeah, the NFPs are too caught up in their own bullshit. Like, we got enough going on just inside our brains. So we want to help. Like, we're really like, we're seriously, two sides of the same coin. Like, we're there for you. It's just like sometimes it may not seem that way. So
yeah, I mean, I think that NFPs, they want to be able to help just the same way, but NFPs are more in tune with the emotional reality when they feel overwhelmed, and NFJs will sort of ignore the fact that they feel overwhelmed and continue to give until they burn out. And I think that NFP empaths have to really look out for and be aware of being delusional, making sure that you are not being delusional. That's because for you guys, the perception and the extroverted intuition is the more sensitive part. And I think that NFJs not so much have to worry about being delusional, but have to worry instead about managing our emotions and making sure that we don't take things out on other people. Because I would say even a very emotionally distraught NFP is probably going to at least process their own emotions by themselves, where an NFJ might lash out on you.
Yeah, that's very true. No, seriously,
Um,
like yeah, go ahead, sorry.
oh no, what were you thinking about that?
Um, I guess like it just really like resonated with my soul because yeah, like it's so crazy that like when you realize, like when you ground yourself and you realize like shit doesn't have to be the way you thought it had to be. Like NFPs are so controlled by their SI, whether they think they are or not. Like I resisted my SI for the longest time, but now I realize it was like the only thing keeping me alive, kind of. I mean, obviously it is because it's my body, but like having the ability to like ground myself and to realize that like the stuff that's happening in my mind is not really happening, that saved me from a lot of bad situations. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Like there is help out there for sure. There are people who will understand you. You know, the thing that feels most painful to NFPs is when they feel like a victim, because it's the feeling that's the most not true. Like we actually have a lot of power, and more power than we understand at first. So
Yeah, I think that NFPs need to realize, especially NFP empaths, is that if you if you can figure out how to keep your vibe high and surround yourself with the sorts of people and environment that is good for you, then you have all of the capabilities of attracting everything that you desire to you just through the extreme power of your heart. Because you guys love so deeply that I think that the actual vibration of your desire is way more intense than most people. And that's why I personally have gotten very jealous of NFPs at certain times, where it's like, how are you so lucky? How are these things happening for you? And I think it's because your emotions are so deep that when you are zoned in on what you want, then I feel like you guys are like a magnet.
it's true. It's like, and I think it's honestly, I think it's connected to NI because I don't think you can have one without the other. When you know yourself really well, the way an NI user does, and you accept the truth, because I think FI is truth in the same way that TI is, but you feel it. And there's no proof out there to show you. You have to prove it to everybody in some way, or just to yourself. Like, you just it's not like something that can exist on its own. And so I feel like that's how the law of attraction works with like NI and SE. So, you know, you attract what you're vibing with. And honestly, like when you are just happiness, when you are what you are, like you're happy, you don't have to fake anything. Things come to you. And I don't know, life feels like it's worth living. It's not like there's no secret to it. It's not like, it sounds like when people hear that, they're like, that's too good to be true. But that's honestly how you should aspire for your life to be, in my opinion. It's not always possible, but you know, I think we have more control than we realize. So
Yeah, and I think that the answer in general always is too good to be true, and always is super simple and easier said than done. But I think that we've all been conditioned to believe that it should be hard because
exactly.
of, you know, capitalism and a bunch of other like things of very left brain culture, where people that aren't empaths have a different sort of view, where it takes, I think, longer maybe for their, it takes a lot of like, if you aren't in tune with your emotions, it takes like a lot of work and a lot of energy to get what you want. Because and so I think that sort of, if you think about it, society is sort of ruled by ST, left brain thinkers, and they have been setting the rules of how things are and how things work. And so the way that they're telling you is the way is a lot more like logical path, and that way works too. But I don't think empaths know that there's another way.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do that way if it doesn't make as much sense to you. If you are by chance an ST watching this, or someone who doesn't resonate with being an empath, you don't have to do this. You could do something else. It's fine. You know, like, I just think it's important for us to know that we don't have to do that, and that our emotions can attract things as well. We don't have to do all the logic.
Yeah. I mean, logic, in my opinion, for empaths should be supportive of your feelings. And I think that's
it's just a different focus. Like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever work on it. And I mean, if you guys have watched a lot of my videos, you know that I'm always talking about self-growth, diving into your shadow, and like using the other parts of you to balance. But I just think in general it's important for us to know that we don't all have to go by the same rules. We can focus on our gifts first.
Yes. And I think that especially should be said for NFJs, because I think they really try more than anybody to take the hard route when they don't have to.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so I feel like once NFJs start listening to their emotions, when they see like the types of people they're attracting and how it's affecting them, they're like, oh, like that's what I am, like that's what I'm feeling. And then, you know, that's the way it turns into kind of a snowball effect. But eventually they realize, like, yeah, I need to just trust my feelings, because when I do, it keeps me on my path. And that's what they're always looking for, to stay on their path. And you can't do that when you're just seeing logic, when you're just seeing like the reasoning. Like, I have this one INFJ friend who she always tries to explain her depression to me in terms of like chemicals, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's like, I know these things are going like haywire in your brain, but also like there's these things outside of you, I think, that you don't realize are making you depressed, and you know, you fail to acknowledge them, not because it's your fault, but because that's how the system is. And I think it always leads back to your purpose. Like, you experience pain where you're supposed to fix it.
Interesting. Can you expand more on that? Experiencing pain when you're supposed to fix it?
Yeah, so I think like especially for empaths, when you experience pain in life, it's because like you didn't have a need met, and you were off your path. And so I feel like that's the FI and the NI of it. But you have the opportunity to change that with NE and FE. And so we use our sensing and thinking functions to support that, but the main portion of it is like the NF values. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, where you experience pain is where you have a story to tell, because otherwise, like, everything would be pretty stable. You know, you won't have like anything to say, really. Like, you have to go through the pain, I feel, in some way, or you have to like witness it and feel others' pain. You know, there's different ways to do it, but I always think it's centered around a problem. And we do solve problems the way ST types do, but we do it in an NF way. So yeah, that's my point.
Yeah. And what was I gonna say? I feel like NFJ empaths are so focused on following their path and being of service and demonstrating love to the world, that we forget that we actually have emotional needs that need to be met, and that we're not superhuman. And we do need that, and we do need to be aware of that. And I think that NFPs, on the other hand, you're so focused on, you know, or how would you describe the parallel to that?
I think I think for ENFPs, we're so focused on trying new things, kind of like coming closer to what we want, and discerning. I think INFPs are more like, they're so focused on staying true to themselves and going out into the world and finding things that like support their already existing values. So I think
maybe it's like your value then, as opposed to something else. Maybe would you say that NFP empaths are wanting to demonstrate their values and be an example of their values?
Yes, being a very, like, a good example for society, a good like a moral conduct almost. I don't know. I want to say yeah, we want to share our morals. That's why a lot of them are into storytelling and like, you know, there's always a theme, there's always a moral at the end. I think that's like a very FI thing.
Yeah. So how about we end this by you giving advice to the NFJs?
You don't want to do that?
And I give advice to the NFPs, and then maybe we also like sort of comment on that too, because I feel like we have sort of a different perspective. We can sort of see the problem of the other person a little bit more.
You're right.
So I feel like you could have a lot to say here in helping the NFJs establish better boundaries and get their emotional needs met. So
Yeah.
So
Let's
how do we do it?
We got this. Mutual roast.
Yeah, let's end this with a good old-fashioned roast.
A good old-fashioned roast. Ooh, okay. So yeah, no, actually I can't roast NFJs. I feel too bad. Like,
Oh no, I want it. I just realized that this whole idea for our new series of videos we're going to be doing is the most Cancer energy thing ever.
It is. I totally think about it. I actually have a theory I'm going to tell you afterwards, but yeah, it's about Cancer. So
okay,
remind
cool.
me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So roast us.
Yeah. So for yeah, NFJ is like, thing is, okay, I do think most NFJs, whether they want to admit it or not, will relate to the archetype of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And yeah, they like, Jesus came, you know, here to demonstrate to us in some ways the sacrifice and what it takes to save all of humanity. So he's showing you that he's a superhuman, you know, he's God's son. You are a person and you can only do what's in your best effort to follow that. But remember, the earth exists. You are a finite person, you know, you have resources, they're limited. I think a lot of NFJs maybe don't want to accept that, or they're just not really thinking about that. But
I just realized I think Buddha and Gandhi are more FI of like I don't know if they're necessarily NFPs, but I still, and I mean I don't even know if Jesus is necessarily an NFJ, but to sort of compare, I almost feel like Buddha could be more of an NFP idea.
Yeah, I guess so.
At least it's at least the FI and FE, because I don't know. I'm getting confused because I'm not trying to literally type the people, but I'm trying to at least think of the archetypes and what they represent. But anyway, continue.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like, yeah, Buddha definitely represents FI more, or NI, like something connecting to the self. Whereas I think Jesus was showing like a worldly sacrifice and many other things. I'm not like trying to say, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is like I think the closest comparison I can make, where NFJ empaths who, you know, identify very closely with being a good person and like, you know, doing their best. That's a great like thing to have. But also, you know, you must remember that you were made for a reason and you are important too. Yeah, I don't know, like, wow, you really are. And I think there's the ones out of everybody who's so focused on like serving others' needs that nobody like really gives anything to them, and I think that's the saddest, like that's the most tragic part. It's a different kind of tragedy than the NFPs, but it is a tragedy nonetheless.
The way that we present ourselves, we make it seem like we don't need anything, and so then people don't give to us.
Yeah, like we don't. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. You guys really you do act like fighters, like you're always you kind of roll with the punches, I think, just because you don't want to admit that you're important and that you're special, because you feel like it's too not humbling, I guess.
I feel like
Yeah.
whenever NFJs, okay, so if you're an empath in an NFJ and you start to sort of see this pattern that's going on and you start to sort of wake up to it and you're like, hey, I should start loving myself. That would be cool. I made a video about this Friday about the cycle of emotional, what was it? The cycle of emotional burnout that I made. I think when we start to open up to that idea, hey, I'm emotionally burnt out. Hey, maybe I should love myself. What we're going to find is that then people are going to start to think that we're full of ourselves. They're going to start to be like, who do you think you are? Do you think you're Jesus Christ or something? Because then we become even more powerful and then we're able to actually give, and it scares people.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think conversely with NFPs, when we like are not authentic with ourselves and we start to like overgive because we're just trying to be a good person, we're just trying to like do what's right in the moment, but we know like something's not right, that's when we start to kind of emotionally burn out too. But I don't think we'll keep taking it. I think we'll kind of lash out at people and like turn into the victim and say like, oh, like that's not you can't do that to a person, like I never wanted this, blah blah blah. But like we don't realize that we were kind of inflicting it on ourselves in some way. At least that's been very true for me. And so I think in a different way, yeah, we kind of turn into kind of like assholes, and that's like the last thing we want to be. So it's a weird concept, but yeah, very different from FJs for sure.
Well, I do think I've seen like a few threads and stuff on Twitter or just like in general, people sort of attacking the idea of being an empath, where it's like, you're not an empath, you just have a victim complex or something. I feel like being an empath is a real thing, but certain people that do identify with being an empath and perhaps over identify to where they don't try and do anything about it or don't know how to balance that energy, I think it is really the NFP that will then turn into this sort of victim mindset a little bit more, and then like NFJs like have no boundaries and become sort of this you can walk all over me sort of person.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't really see NFPs as being able to be walked on for that long before they start whining. What would you say about that?
No, I think you're totally right. I think we're kind of babies in that way. Like and it's not a bad thing. Like we just know, I think, when shit doesn't feel right, because at least for me as like an SI user, I'll start to feel it in my body. Like I'll start getting sick really often. I can't like attend to my TE duties or my SI duties. And so I feel like, yeah, when your life starts to crumble as an NFP, we start to get very resentful and we feel like the world's against us and victimizing us because we can't function, and everybody can see that we can't function. But yeah, I think we just need to put ourselves under the right circumstances, which, you know, arguably there aren't a lot for us today. And not just for NFPs, but for people in general, but like to live a happy life. But
yeah, I think the circumstances is a huge, huge thing for NFPs to remember, is that not every circumstance is going to be able to invoke a good emotion in you. And if you have to move and change circumstances, then that's okay. And if that means moving to a different city, or if it means cutting off some of your friends, if it means saying no, whatever it means to get a new set of circumstances.
Yes. And yeah, you have to feel free. Like, I think that's another big thing. It's like when you feel free, you feel happy. That's why, you know, people think money makes them free, but it doesn't. And, you know, that's what we all learn about through life. But yeah, I think like when you find ways that make you feel free in your own life, that's when you'll start to notice a shift. And sometimes it could just be like changing your mentality. But I think like starting by changing the circumstances is good, because you show yourself that like, yes, the TE circumstances can change. It's not always like this. It doesn't have to be like this. So yeah, I think we definitely have to be like in a dynamic environment to actually learn.
Yeah. And so I guess I'll segue here by giving some advice to the NFPs, which I guess I kind of just did. But the advice that I would give to an NFP empath is to really be careful and second guess your impressions of the world. As far as what is true and what's not true, be very, very careful, because I think that your emotions can really filter what you're seeing. And your emotions are always valid, but your perception can really, it's there to protect you. And so it's not a bad thing. And so I'm not trying to tell you that you shouldn't trust yourself, but know that you have an ability to project your emotions onto everything that you see. And I think that the empath NFP does that so that you can color your world to be something very beautiful and really craft your world to be what you want it to be. But if you're not in a very good mood or a good place, then you might not be seeing things clearly. And so giving yourself a second to just take a deep breath before you lash out at someone, or before you convince yourself that your life is over, to really just get a good look at what's going on, meditate, take a deep breath, and then do not jump to conclusions. There is always a way out. Everything is figure outable. You can do it. You could do it.
Everything is figure outable.
Yes, that is Marie Forleo, who I follow. So credit to her. But yeah, everything's figure outable. And it's funny, Marie Forleo always says that. I believe she's an ESFJ. She's like one of my favorite like business YouTubers. But anyway, yeah, I relate to that. Is that it's funny because NFPs can be some of the most open-minded people, but if you are not in a good mood, then you can be very closed-minded, and you can only see what you want to see. And so really just noticing when you are in that mindset, and be like, hey, I'm only seeing my emotion, but there are always things that you could do to get out of that and to a different set of circumstances and to find a better emotion. And so that sort of resilience, knowing that there are better emotions to feel at that time, I think something that ENFJs can do better, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think too, like, another thing to look out for is when you start acting like your shadow type. So for example, I'm an ENFP. When I start to become unhealthy, when I'm drained as an empath, I start to act like an INFJ and like get really like tunnel vision almost about being like, just like a slave or like a servant to somebody else. And it's very upsetting, like to my FI. So I think to notice, I think when I start to see myself as that, that's when I need to realize I have more power than this. Like, nobody is making me feel like this. I'm kind of making myself feel this way because of these NI reasons, like experiences I've had in the past that kind of turned into a thought pattern. And so it's very beneficial to learn like how your shadow function, your functions work, because you'll see where the problems are coming from, why you're feeling inauthentic as an NFP. Or, you know, if you're an NFJ, I feel like they start to feel taken advantage of too, and they start like never going out and like, I don't know. Is that true though?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I would compare what you said with though is that I think that NFJ empaths seem to know that they're responsible for their emotions. But maybe we have less control and understanding over the possibilities or ways to get out of things. Like, like we can have tunnel vision in that way of thinking this is the only right way, and like not know what to do. Like we can think, I feel like a lot of empath NFJs can find themselves into these sort of catch-22 scenarios we're either I continue feeling bad or this person continues feeling bad, and then we can like not know how to get out of it. But yeah, I mean, there's been a couple times in my life where I was feeling pretty depressed, where I had to be dragged out of bed and just like was so burnt out, I had no energy to give and do anything. And it was actually my, you know, NFP friend that had to get me to snap out of it and like actually love myself. Because, and what I talked about in the emotional burnout, the cycle of emotional burnout video, which I will link somewhere here, is that NFJ empaths can sort of get to this point where we find no good reason to love ourselves, no good reason to meet our own needs, but we have to, because we won't be able to continue loving others or doing our mission if we aren't loving ourselves, because that is like the exact fuel that we need in order to keep going.
Yes.
And nobody's coming to our rescue. So
yeah, and so I think one thing to notice too is in real life, like these two types will look super different. Like it'll seem like the NFP is super selfish, like super in their own head, but in reality I feel like we always are trying to serve other people. We are always trying to do the right thing too, but it doesn't seem that way because we just seem very self-serving, when in reality, like once we serve ourselves, we are best able to help others. And then NFJs,
you guys know that a lot better than us.
Yeah, exactly. And so the NFJs, like they'll just do whatever they can, like to help and really burn themselves out, but they don't realize that they're doing this for a selfish reason, and it's to feel like they're worthy and like they're loved and you know, worthy of existing, because they don't feel like they can love themselves, like Megan said, sometimes. So
yeah, I guess one last thing we can sort of talk about at the end is what sort of the extreme stereotypes, like, yeah, like I would say the empath NFP extreme stereotype would be like this sort of head in the clouds, sort of like doesn't know what they're like, very free spirit, nomad, wanderer, like you talk a big game of like, oh, I'm so loving or whatever, but might struggle to actually do it, maybe.
Yeah, they'll be like, honestly seem kind of pretentious. I think like they'll just seem like they know everything and they have like, they're the best people in the world, but they haven't proven it yet. Also, I think NFPs more than other people, when struggling with FI, if this is the core issue, then they are struggling also with self-love, and which is a similar problem as NFJs. It's just more on display for everybody to see. And so I think NFPs, when they're struggling with self-love, will act like they'll just be doing really self-destructive things. Like they'll have terrible addictions to escapism, like, you know, fantasy realities. They'll just feel like they cannot deal with the world, because it has been like so painful for them. And so yeah, I think that's a very extreme form, like just kind of the lost artist, I would say, like the
way we deal with
wolf.
emotions can be very different too, because like I think NFPs might engage in fantasy to escape certain emotions, whereas an NFJ empath would just cry and beg and be clingy and just be very obviously sad, like in your face.
yeah, I see that.
Yeah, and I would say NFJ empaths can seem very pretentious as well, and sort of have this air of like, I think of you all need to act like me, even if we don't consciously know that or know that we think that. It can sort of be like we are demonstrating the correct way that we think that people should act, and we think that we would feel less overwhelmed by the world if everyone were as nice as we were. And so we have a responsibility for our actions to be in line with our values, so that people can hopefully learn from us and that we can live in a better place. where people were just always thinking of others. But yeah, and I think definitely I hope you guys are commenting below any questions you might have, because Christine and I are going to start to do more videos sort of giving more specific advice. Like if you let me know which one of these you relate to. Maybe if you're new to the Myers-Briggs community but you know you're an empath, like I'd love to know which one you relate to, because eventually I'd really love to have sort of like specific self-help things that people in this community can do, because I think that we have a lot of energy to manage, and we have really big goals, and we don't really, it can be very hard to just exist in the world for both of us.
Oh yeah, very true.
People think we're so sensitive, and we are, but we could use that sensitivity for something else. I don't know. It's
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, I think you said it all. Pretty much.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to, any last words for empaths?
I don't know, because I feel like I'm still on this journey myself, so I don't know if I have all the answers.
Yeah.
Or
same.
even like a fraction of the answers to this. Like, this is just what I've realized thus far, like from discovering I'm an empath. But I want to say this far getting into it is that it gets better once you realize that like there's a whole world out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And I guess I'll say too that, you know, the age of Aquarius is among us, guys. We are transitioning to 5D reality, and there are so many of us here. You are not alone, and you're not the only one that feels this way. It's getting harder and harder to just cope with reality. And so I'm excited to sort of collectively dive in and really inhabit our energy for all it is and use it for good, and not feel like we're always having to cope. Because we shouldn't just be coping with the way that things are set up now, which is very geared toward left brain thinking. We deserve to live the way that, you know, we can share our biggest gifts. We deserve that.
Yes, in the way that we were designed to live.
Exactly. And we don't always have to be coping with this other way. We can make it so that there's more equality in everybody getting to live the way that they're designed. So yeah, thank you so much, Christine. I'm so excited.
No, thank you, Megan.
Thank you guys.
I'm super excited too.
Yay!
Yes, happy Pisces season.
Yay, happy Pisces season. Oh, and if you guys are curious, we have a Facebook group about astrology and cognitive functions. If you'd like to join, that is linked below. So thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day, Christine, and thank you guys.
You too, Megan.
Video.
Bye, guys. Have a nice day.
Bye.